Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. I have on the screen Josh Wood. He's the executive director of Them Before Us. You may not have heard about that organization before. I have. It is something I find so passionate about. It was founded by Katie Faust. She's been on my podcast before. Katie was raised by a lesbian mother and her partner, and she and I had that in common because even though my mother and father were married 13 years and I have a good relationship with my father, she too left her dad or her husband, my dad, and moved in with a woman. And so there are consequences of those choices. There are a lot of things happening in now in our society, which is trying to paint that particular thing as good. Now, my guest, Josh Wood, though, is taking that a step further in conjunction with a couple other authors, because we're talking about a book that he has helped to author. It is called Pro-Child Politics: Why Every Cultural, Economic, and National Issue is a Matter of Justice for Children. I am so excited because they're talking way past just the homosexual issue that I just pointed to. Everything going on in society focuses more on the adults than the children, and Josh and Them Before Us is trying to put an end to that and say, follow what is best for the children as well. Josh, I'm so grateful you were so patient to finally get on my show. We got an opening in here. I've been wanting to have you on for a while. So God bless you for coming on, for waiting, and God bless you for writing this book.
Thank you. No, I'm excited to dive into it. I think maybe the timing was perfect. We're a couple weeks before a really important election, and these are important questions.
Why? I know why Katie's part of Them Before Us. Why are you?
Well, at the end of the day, if you want to help and you want a society to flourish, we want to seek the welfare of our cities. There's nothing more important than getting marriage and family right, than protecting a child, making sure they're raised in the context of marriage by their biological mother and father whenever possible. And so, as a person who wants that, and as a person that really has worked for a majority of their career downstream, so I worked at a large kind of foundation, worked at a church doing missions and giving. I helped a lot of organizations down the road who were engaged in helping kids that were finding themselves incarcerated, working with food banks that were helping kids who didn't have access to good food, working with kids who didn't know how to read, working all those ailments, those things that were affecting children. And after a while, I realized that so much of this, so much of the circumstances they find themselves in have to do one way or another with the breakdown of the family. And so I thought, man, I'm passionate about this issue and I need to find a place that's going to advocate for really the keystone issue, protecting a child, making sure they're raised in the context of marriage by their biological mother and father whenever possible.
Were you?
I was. Yeah, I
You
had
were.
that benefit. Mm-hmm.
And what did you notice was most different from the kids who didn't and the kids who did? Because you're a lot younger than me. You look like you're 30s, perhaps.
Yep. 30s. Yep. What was the biggest difference? I think it's critical, when a mother and father are both participating in family, they're obviously they're married. I do think you see them being able to play the role that God intended. That you can share though both the workload in some families where both parents work. You can share the parenting load. The truth is, it, it's very, very hard to raise children by yourself.
Yeah.
I have three young ones. I can't imagine. I can't be everything to them. I can be an incredible dad. I never can be their mom. I don't care if I'm the superhuman dad. I can never be their mom. Not to mention having two hands at bath time and breakfast time and school time.
That's true.
I think that it's so important. And so I think primarily God designed it in a way that provided the two people who are going to invest and care and protect and provide safety and provision for those children. And I just think that's irreplaceable. I really do. And not to knock families that don't have it, because I know there's a lot of parents who are parenting by themselves, not by their choice.
Correct.
And they're trying to do a heroic thing. And sometimes grandparents can step in and try to mend those wounds. But I think the critical thing is for us to call them wounds. I think the normalization of it is what is the downfall. I think everybody, either those heroic single parents, want people to say, this isn't what God intended, because they feel abandoned too. They feel like, well, this shouldn't have happened to me. And we want to say, yes, you're right. And then we want to step up as a community and help mend what a wound that should have never been there.
Well, I'm so impressed that you say that too, because you're right. A lot, that is really the starting point. So many people say that common known phrase, children are resilient. Children can handle, well, yeah, they can handle it too. We've had people that have been in concentration camps who've handled it. We've got guys who've been into Vietnam and prison camps and they've handled it. But it didn't mean they didn't come out scarred. And if those were happening to them by enemies in foreign lands, I think the wound is even deeper when it is at the hand of our parents. And I'm not bad mouthing any of you out there.
Right.
I left my husband when I had two small children. We have reconciled after 4 years apart. But that was a decision I selfishly made on my own because I wasn't happy. And it did affect my children who are now 37 and 40. And every now and then we'll have conversations about things that I'll see that are a result from that short 4 years apart back then. So we do have to acknowledge that. Layla Miller wrote the book called Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. And that is a very powerful book that you just can't get through it. I don't know that there's any human that's made it through the whole book because it's the anonymous words of all these now adult children of how their parents' divorces killed them. One person said, it's like, divorce is like a bloodless form of child sacrifice. So I could go more and more, but I'm not here to talk about her book. I'm here to address what you said, that there is in fact a wound. And if we keep these kids first, well, if we become selfless, that's the best thing we can do, not only for our children, but for each other and for our society.
Well, you bring up a good point about resiliency. My graduate work was in disaster relief, and resiliency is a word we use a lot to talk about communities, how they can build resiliency prior to a hurricane or a flood, which I'm out here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh, so you're dealing with
Resiliency,
it right now.
yeah, 2 hours to our west is one of the worst floods, one of the most damaging hurricanes in history in the United States. Well, no one would say after the fact, the hurricanes rolled through, there's devastation everywhere, that somehow out of this, people are going to be stronger for the event. Resiliency is something you build in preparation for an event that you don't wish would happen. Resiliency is something you build intentionally and strategically and bit by bit as budget allows and as the community can handle it. You reinforce levees, you redesign roads that sometimes require some destruction and rebuilding. Those can be painful processes. It can cost a lot of money. But resiliency is something applied strategically by a knowing adult over time to increase an ability for a community to defend itself essentially and to rebound after a traumatic event like a natural disaster. So to say that kids are resilient, like somehow they're going to come through a divorce that's intentional, right? That's perpetuated on the child, and they're going to be better for it. Resiliency is something that two parents do strategically, investing in their child, giving them a little bit longer leash in certain situations, allowing them to walk to the market to get something they needed for dinner, to ask the neighbor for sugar because they're a little socially awkward and the kids don't want to do that. It's allowing them to fail on the soccer team and not intervening. And then you progress over time to sending them off to college on their own to make adult decisions without a helicopter mom or dad jumping in and grabbing them. That's appropriate strategic resilience, knowing that at some point they may encounter a really horrible situation in college or as a young adult, and you're hoping their shared experiences over time have prepared them for that. Not what we're talking about here with divorce, where we're taking a 5 or 6 year old kid and we're asking them to split Christmas between two places, and they've forgotten their math textbook at dad's and they're not going to have it for a week, and the parent teacher's asking them where it is and they have to explain this in front of the class, and they're experiencing the awkwardness and that's not resiliency. So I agree with you. This is incumbent on us, and this really gets to the core of what we believe at Them Before Us, which is who is being asked to do the hard thing. You do not erase difficulty. in any situation. You just transfer it. And so when a mom and a dad split, and there are outlined biblical cases, reasons for divorce, there are times where we need to facilitate a speedy divorce in terms of neglect or abuse to make sure we protect the kids. But these divorces by choice, where there is no fault and parents are splitting because they're unhappy, that unhappiness doesn't just go away when someone finds a new partner. That unhappiness gets transferred and fractured into the child's lives.
Deacon Harold Burke Sivers was on my radio show years ago, and he was the adult child of divorce, Catholic deacon at this point. And he said, divorce is like putting your cross down and forcing your children to pick it up. And that was so powerful to me, because the cross still exists. I remember when a family member of mine said, well, my husband's just a miserable man and I just can't be around him anymore. I said, so now you're going to let your children be around him without you there to protect him?
Wow.
You know, we have to really think about it, because if it was really so true, if I really thought my spouse was abusive or just that, what kind of a mom or a dad would we be if we, but I'll leave you kids with that person. It's just a lie that we use to cover our own pain. And I'm not saying we don't have difficult relationships. Again, I filed for divorce. My husband, I had a terrible marriage for many years, and I was in pain constantly. I understand the pain of a marriage. But yes, we shouldn't focus just on that. And I don't want to take this conversation, Josh, unless you want to, just in that place. But that's really what it is. We want to try to keep these kids in this foundational home. I really loved when I went through the book that you guys, okay, so you can tell them about it, but you brought in other guest experts in different areas to kind of cover in their expertise things like the economy. How can you be child focused in the economy? How can you be child focused in politics? How can you be, let's see, you've got immigration, you know, tell me how all of that came together, because that was bigger than I thought. You even have, you know, Ken Harrison writing on masculinity. I just recorded a podcast a half hour before this one, and we were talking about that, how men need to be masculine and we need to give them permission. Anyway, I'm going to wind up like a little doll and say go, because those are awesome topics.
Well, and you know, to note about divorce in general, it's a good thing to start with, because I think sometimes we get painted in one corner or another. And I want to remind you, when we talk about the premise or the thesis of this book, adults doing hard things on behalf of kids and making your policy centered around what's best for them and the next generation, you you're going to find that you're going to make everyone mad at some point. This type of theology, if you will, political philosophy, it will call for adults to sacrifice and to inconvenience themselves greatly and to think long term. Of every stripe, of every political tribe, it asks something of everyone at some point. And so obviously we're not an expert in, subject matter expert in immigration, but we did want to think critically about this idea that when adults refuse to do hard things, we transfer the responsibility to our children and our grandchildren, and our problems, once small, will multiply exponentially. So we've got to take our preference for comfort, which makes it, if we lean into that, it's going to make our conversations around debt and immigration much, much worse in a generation. And so we wanted to say, okay, how about we find someone who knows debt or immigration, and let's have them answer some questions for us. What are the lies being told right now in this area that will perpetuate child harm? The things we tell ourselves to be okay with policies that are short term and that will ultimately kick the can and create a more difficult situation for our kids down the road. So what are those lies? And then what are the truths that we need to believe if we're going to break this cycle? And so that's what we did. We found 19 of our closest friends that know these topics, and we walked through what are the lies, the truths, and how can we do a better job of protecting kids. And like you mentioned, it kind of goes through almost every topic you can think of, although knowing Katie, she's going to have a volume 2 here very soon. So you expect that coming down the pike. But I'll give you just an example. Education, right? That's a great example. How do we think through what it means to be pro-child in education? So I'll say one of the real big lies that were told during that was that we are this is a lie, to be clear, that we co-parent with the government, that we co-parent, that these are all our children.
Oh,
That
yeah.
keep right, keep it together. I know it
It
kills me.
takes a village to raise a child. Actually, it just takes a really solid family, and the village is going to either positively or negatively affect that.
Yes, yes. And so we wanted to think through, okay, what does it mean then? What do they mean when they say that? Well, they're trying to push experts. They're trying to push that they know better than you. And uh, that type of thinking can lead us to make all sorts of decisions, including having the parent begin to step back and say, maybe I don't really know. And then the school begins to step up and starts to be mom and dad to the child and take on roles and have conversations that we should never be having. So anyway, we talk about in the book, a good example of this was during COVID, that there was certainly a risk during COVID of transmission from students to teachers, from teachers to students. There was some risk. At the time, we were working our way through that. Even at our least amount of knowledge, we knew there was some risk, but we also knew at the same time there's a dialectic here of there's also some risk for the kid going home. I remember in Charlotte, North Carolina here, we had real trouble getting iPads out to all of the kids. The last one got delivered months after school had started. Then there was the issue of connectivity, everyone having Wi-Fi. Well, it actually takes good Wi-Fi to have a Zoom call with 30 participants on it.
Yeah.
And then it takes a parent there to set up the call and click on all the Zoom links that are all color coded for the different classes. Not to mention adults have trouble sitting on Zoom calls for 8 hours a day. So you start to go through this and you go, well, there is a risk, right, of someone getting the virus, but are we about to doom our students, especially the poor ones, the ones that don't have resource? Are we about to doom them to a generational gap in educational attainment? And I saw just a wholesale refusal to really contend with that tension. All of the conversation went to the harm that could be perpetuated on adults, the harm that the
Grandma.
teachers,
It's only
yes,
grandma.
yeah, we couldn't have the teachers contracting the virus. And primarily, I knew so many teachers in Charlotte who said, we have to go back. We have to go back. I mean, my wife is a nurse. She didn't take a day off. She worked shifts all through the pandemic. And you saw teachers go, wait a second, we are essential. We're heroes. We belong in the school. Those kids need us. I'm here to tell you, they will not fare better in their apartment than they will in this classroom. We saw that time and time again, these teachers wanting it and teachers unions and other forces holding them back, keeping the schools closed. Well, I would say, and for whatever nefarious reason, right, to extract more concessions, to get an upgrade to a facility, whatever, there was all sorts of reasons. Maybe there was a political game being played. I don't know. But what I saw was a decision to prioritize the health and well-being of adults over what would become a generational divide on educational attainment for the kids. And that's the crux of what we're talking about is we chose adults over children. And that created terrible policy. And we haven't even begun to start paying for it. Those kids are
Yeah.
going to be hurt for, from their sessions of getting Wi-Fi at Taco Bell, having to sit in the parking lot in the middle of the bitter cold. We are going to pay for that decision.
On earth and in heaven. Well,
Right.
we may not make it to heaven depending on how bad our decisions were. So, yeah, there are consequences to every single choice, and selfishness has a heavy penalty. We have to constantly be looking, how can I do for others as I would have them do to me?
Right.
Okay, so that's education. I am kind of curious because it's my place of the masculinity and femininity. You had separate authors write, as I said earlier, Ken Harrison, who is the chairman of the Promise Keepers, wrote about masculinity. You also had Peachy
Right.
Keenan write about femininity and not feminism. I'm curious how those prioritize adults over children and how we could do them differently.
Well, I think Ken did a great job talking about a lie that masculinity means machismo. It means the idea that men
That it's
should be,
toxic.
yes, that it's ultimately toxic, that this radical reaction that weakness is somehow a virtue in men. I had this example, a great example with my daughter over this experience we had with the hurricane. We didn't get hit. We had lots of power outages. Our house was out of power for 3 or 4 days. We're sitting on the back porch watching the power lines that were directly behind our house. They were all down, and these young men pile out of this lineman truck, just probably 15 of them. And they're all 22, 25-year-old men. And they come to the back deck and they say, hey, we're going to be moving some cords. Just so you guys know, don't go past the deck. And Savannah, my daughter, who is a headstrong little 6-year-old girl, said, why are there no girls out here? And we looked it up. Again, we'll be factually, statistically correct. I think they're quick Google search, which is, maybe reliable, had 137 female linemen in the country out of 24,000. So it's not like there's no female linemen. Shout out if you're a female fixing the electrical, poles and lines. There was very few though. And we talked about why that is, that God made us different, that men tend to choose these very dangerous, outdoor, strength-oriented positions. They often have more upper body strength. I can lift things that mom can't, and that leads us to choose different positions. And she said, well, that doesn't seem fair. And we talked about how my wife, being a nurse, we visited Corinne at work several times, and there was always a floor full of female nurses. And Savannah said, yeah, they're all girls at the hospital. And we said, well, why is that? Well, nursing tends to be more maternal. It's caring, it's people oriented. And a lot of girls like that more than they like doing this other job. And she said, oh, but you can choose whichever one you want, but God made you to care and like different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that one's better than another. We're just different. And so she began to see that strength and the appetite for danger is inherent to being a male, and defense and protection is hardwired into us. It's not bigotry, it's biology. It's very different. And Savannah, in this little moment, got to say, oh, so I can be what I want to be, but I'm more likely to choose nursing. I'm more likely to want to be in the hospital. Because even when we talked about it, she's like, yeah, well, I would rather be in the hospital taking care of people. I said, that's just how God made you. And if you choose to do something else, you're welcome to. But again, we're even at a young age, you get a chance to start deconstructing these lies and talking about the goodness, how that strength serves society.
And which one's more important, Savannah? Is it more important to have someone helping you with fix your life, or someone trying to keep you alive with electricity so your refrigerator can stay on so you can have food? I suspect Savannah would see how they're both equally as important in the body of Christ, right? We're in a body of a community. And we need our sanitation workers as much as we need our lawyers, as much as we need, well, we don't need lawyers as much as we have, but I'm just kidding. But you're right, deconstructing and show that there is value in either of these, but let's value the way God made. I'm glad you brought up, the male brain. I was going to say, the male brain is wired to provide and protect. And a man feels most manly, most successful when he can protect someone, primarily a female or a child, but he wants to protect and he wants to provide, and that's when he feels most accomplished. I did this, I built this house, I built this family, I fed my family, I put those poles up and kept the storm away from my family. And you're right, the woman is, thank you for taking care of us, let me feed you. Although my husband says if I cook, I'm killing him because my cooking's horrible, but that's a different subject.
But we can appreciate this is where we've got to move to, is we can appreciate our difference and understand that there can be an equal value in the contribution of society and have equality in being both made in the image of God and be profoundly different. And that's okay. And I think the lies, they train us. Femininity is another chapter. These lies that push us, like Peachy says, your career is more important than a family. That lie that may push a female into diving so deep into a career that she delays starting a family. She's afraid of what it might mean for her. And then she gets past the position where she can start that family or have a family or even get married. And now she feels awful. Well, there's another lie on tap for her, that marriage is optional when raising a child. You can be a single mother by choice. Though both of those things are almost trying to facilitate this lie we saw with masculinity, that everyone's equal, you can do whatever you, or that everyone is the same, not equal, and that you can do whatever you want. Well, you have to pile on all these other lies, because when you do believe, start down this path, you're going to end up in situations like we saw in Peachy's chapter, where a woman is believing that I have to raise my child by myself, and that's okay because I chose a career, but that's okay because I chose this career because I thought I had to, because that meant that I was breaking for out of my mold, which I should. And again, all these lies just been to construct, putting parents in very, very difficult situations like parenting alone. And we've got to break out of these things and tell people the truth, that it's okay to delay your career. Now, we may need bosses that are more pro-child, that respect and honor and support women's choices to take a break to raise a family. That's a legitimate conversation to be had. But these lies that push you to delay, thinking there'll be no consequences, that's just not telling you the truth.
Yeah, I have a family member who wants to have a child because she has an only child and she wants to use a sperm donor to have another child. And she said that, my child needs a sibling. And I said, let's consider the child you're trying to purchase. I'm not purchasing. Well, you do have to give money to get that sperm. And you know nothing about that child. And you're intentionally going to bring a child into the world that will never know its father, so that what, you can be happy? Well, my other child, it's like, okay, let's assume your existing child would be happy to have the sibling. You're still putting yourself and what you want over the potentiality of what that child will want. And then of course they were like, well, that's just a minority. Every child will be happy to be alive and they won't care. And so it really was a mentality I had to try to beat down, going, no, you're still thinking only about yourself. You've got to think about the child. We have a really difficult time, Josh, with putting ourselves in other people's shoes, specifically children.
Well, it kills me to see people out of a, because the way marriage or gender roles have often been framed, they avoid them because they're afraid of the oppression that would come with them, believing the lie that marriage is going to, if you're a man, it's going to domesticate you and you're not going to get the sense of adventure. If you're a female, it's going to oppress you and you're not going to be able to live out your career in the way you want it. And what you end up getting are these 40-year-old individuals who may be super successful in their career or have had all these sexual adventures or exploits that are so empty and gone. And they wake up to these lies, understanding that their rebellion against their gender roles or their rebellion against these institutions have really left them empty and alone. And I think we're trying to get to people before that happens, and to say, you can lean into these maternal impulses. You can lean into this desire for monogamous love. You can trust that even though it may seem like you're giving something up, and this is where, our faith just has to come out, that when we follow God's plan, it can sometimes in the beginning feel like a sacrifice, but it's in losing our life that we gain it. It's in forgiving that we find freedom. Forgiveness is giving up that right to be angry, offended, or frustrated, or mad, or the desire for revenge or retribution. But we all know that lying is often like drinking poison, or being angry is often like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. Forgiveness is what gives us freedom. So there is a little bit of a paradox here that, by giving up that freedom, by leaning into who God made you to be, by not suppressing that, you can actually find the freedom and fulfillment you're looking for. And ultimately that leads to the type of family structures and actions that protect children, that keep us on track to have families that flourish. But that's not the way society works right now. I mean, they are full blown pushing against this structure to try to separate those institutions so people can live ultimately alone,
Selfish
and that's
lives.
not
Yeah.
good. Yeah, it's not good for them.
You brought up the word several times, and it's important to this conversation. It's the word sacrifice. We have forgotten the word sacrifice, but if you know anything about the etymology of the word, sacra, the Latin root sacra means holy, and ficia means to make. To sacrifice is to make holy. And so when I sacrifice my needs for my husband, or I sacrifice my needs for my child, or I sacrifice my needs for a random person on the street. I am becoming holier. To be holy means to be set apart. I want to be set apart from the culture. I want to be special in God's eyes. I want to be like, look, I'm trying to please you and not them. So if we really had to, as I kept going through this book, and if I had to summarize it, it is how to sacrifice, how to become holier by flipping the tables and putting others before the self. And if we did that, if we understood to make holy, I think it would have a little bit more appeal to people, the word sacrifice, instead of this to sacrifice, a greater
It's
understanding.
it's hard because people don't want to hear that.
Mm,
People aren't interested in hearing. You see this in our politics all the time. One candidate will offer the world. They'll say, you can have your cake and eat it too. That there's no need for you to think about discipline and sacrifice, that we've got unlimited funds, that
right.
take immigration, for example, that,
Mm,
well, we can take in all of the world's hurting, that every single person that comes to our border, we have a home for, and that every single child that comes, we can be a mom and dad to them, even if they're all alone. And the truth is, we are not that. We can't be that. We have within our borders now, within our inner cities in rural America, we have poverty and hurting people that were born here, that we have an obligation to, who are citizens who we cannot take care of. We do not have the funds. And so we need somebody who's willing to tell the truth. Just like the COVID conversation, that this isn't just a one risk situation. There are two that we need to contend with. And while we risk with immigration, we do risk hurting our national identity as a nation of immigrants that always want to be a beacon of hope. We want to be a welcoming nation. We want to be a welcoming country that is a place of hope and ultimately a place of prosperity. That's true. But we also compromise that by taking more people in than we can appropriately deliver the
right.
American dream
Right.
to. And that's our primary. In the book we talk about, we need to contend with both sides of this and have somebody tell the truth, that it's ultimately not racist to want a secure border. It's not bigotry to say that we need an orderly process. This is just telling the truth that we have limited resources, and by facilitating chaos and confusion at the border, we're actually harming children. We're putting more kids, we're incentivizing the wrong types of policies that actually send kids to come by themselves, because parents don't think they can ever go through the process in an orderly fashion, because we're giving court dates 7 years from now when people come through. So they're actually incentivized to go alone, and we're losing children that way. Again, the dangers of our unwillingness to tell the truth is harming kids. And we have got to have some politicians with the courage to tell us we can't have it all. These are difficult choices.
Yeah.
And Americans, we need to sacrifice if we want to get where we want to go, where we're taking care of everybody in our country. We're giving them all the American dream we promised, and we're establishing a secure border. And then we're taking every single person that we can afford to, that we can give that same dream to. That's what I'm personally in favor of. We got to get to that point, but we're not there currently, and someone needs to step up and lead.
Yeah. I think recently with the hurricane, so much money was given to immigrants that there's no money to give to the Americans who are in need of it. But that's a separate topic. Of these topics in the book, which one was your favorite? I know that's probably super hard because, like I said, we've talked about masculinity, femininity, transgenderism, life, immigration, taxes, education. I know that's just a sampling, but was there any article or two that really resonated with you?
Well, I am Katie's the dreamer, right? And so I'm the practical person on our team. And so I'll go to the chapter that I wrote that talks about the conclusion. It's the practical application. Because I do think, when you talk with people like Peachy or you talk to Katie, you can be overwhelmed. They're so smart. They know so much about these topics. You can kind of feel like, if you remember like the fair trade coffee movement back in the day, where you just kind of got the sense like, oh my gosh, can I drink coffee anywhere? Can I buy a bagel anywhere? Can I buy my groceries without perpetuating the evil empire? Like, it just begins to be analysis paralysis. And I think with all of these issues, you can sometimes begin to feel that way too. That like, oh man, you just read me the riot act on immigration and debt and economy and policing and masculinity. And what am I supposed to do with all of this? And so I think the conclusion provides some basics that are next steps for individuals who are looking to do something. And I can run through some of those. It's staying informed. It's
Yeah.
listening to good conversations. It's curating, opposing viewpoints. There's even those who have strong opinions. There's nothing worse than really thinking you're right and finding out one day that you've been mistaken. So seek out those voices that are opposed to you and test your ideas. Have hard
Yeah.
conversations. Read things you don't agree with and read long things, not just headlines and snippets and sound bites. So first is, are you getting information from good sources, from diverse voices? So our authors are a good place to start with that. You can follow them. Uh, Getting to neutral is the second piece. And what I mean by that is, if you're feeling overwhelmed, sometimes a good thing, not all of us are prepared to go you pick at the school board meeting or try to shut down our gym that's allowing transgender spaces. But what we can do is say, hey, I'm just going to start by opting out of the places that don't share my values. So I might not lead a campaign to end the transgender spaces at my gym, but I might cancel my membership and in places that
Yes.
don't share my value and just say, hey, this is why I'm doing this. And I don't think it's right. Leave a little comment, talk to a membership manager. Even that, I'm just going to stop contributing to the harm. I'm not going on the offensive yet, but man, that's a good place to
It's a
start.
good starting point. Yeah.
Just getting to neutral. Uh, then I think it's important as Christians for us to just pick some battles. Now, if you get to that point, you pray through it. What are one of these things that are really on your heart? What is the issue? Is it, if it's femininity, is it your job to set an example for what it looks like to pause your career proudly? And to show and demonstrate the purpose and fulfillment that can come from starting a family? Is it to have your kid on Zoom calls and make family more of a part of family rhythms and leaving work early to go to a soccer game? Is that something that you can begin to push in your team and corporate culture, that family is important and children are important and they're a blessing, and man, they're just so much more important than work. Like there are things we can do. Maybe it's running for school board. Maybe it is, trying to lead a ballot initiative. There's so many of these things, but
Yeah.
praying through which of these is your thing. What is God
Yeah.
calling you to do?
Stay in
And
your
then
wheelhouse because God planted those seeds in you for a reason.
yes, and finally, it's growing the team. Things like this where we're talking and we're trying to recruit people into activated mode where they can get up and do their thing. And so that's having conversations, it's having coffee, it's trying to get people to see, man, when we put children at the center, when we consider first what's best for them in these conversations, when we look at our national debt ballooning over time, and we say short-term spending may be good for us, forgiving loans may be good for us, but someone's going to pay for those. You're transferring that debt down the road, and we need to prioritize them, even if that's uncomfortable and inconvenient for us. We may not get everything we want. Well, when we do things like that, centering the child, we're going to get great policy. Well, when you convince people of those ideas and they begin to adopt it in their sphere, well, that's how we begin to win.
Well, dang, you are so articulate, man. I can see you're so passionate about this. That's excellent. Um, I always end saying the same thing, but you kind of answered. So I always say, name one thing. And you did it, but I'm going to do it again. Name one thing you would have our listeners do differently as a result of something they heard today.
If I had to boil it down to just one thing, that's a tough one.
I know, because you just gave 5 really good ones in a row.
Man, I think everything starts with being informed. I really don't think if we bury our head in the sands as Christians, I think we're never going to have God convict our hearts on an issue. I've always been a firm believer that God gives us an internal sense of justice, and you can sometimes locate it in yourself when you read a story or experience a video or a conversation with a friend, and you hear a traumatic story or something that just feels off, and you hear your heart saying, that's not right. That's not right. That is it. That's the navigation. And we have to have exposure. I have a friend who says, don't look away, because there are people who don't have the privilege of looking away. So when you do get that and you're like, I can't deal with this, it's too much, it's too hard. Remember, there are certain people who don't have the privilege of looking away. They can't escape these spaces. And so I'd say get exposed, read, get informed, and have God really touch your heart on one of these issues. That is the activation. And let God take care of the rest. Holy Spirit will direct you and guide you from there. But it all starts, I think, with exposing ourselves and getting good information into our system.
Where can they get the book?
You can get it on Amazon. Anywhere books are sold, there it's everywhere right now. Head to our website, thembeforeus.com. You can sign up for our mailing list. You can support our work. Everything's there. The book's there as well. But if you want it in 2 days, you really can't beat Amazon.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, get it. Them Before Us. And while you're there, look at the other books that they have. They have Raising, what is it? Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke Culture. The book entitled by the organization's name, Them Before Us. Full. It's got more statistics in that book. And it's not a statistic book. I mean, it's got stories. I don't want to make it seem like it's some academic book. It's got stories about people whose lives were devastated when their dad became a female and things like that. But then it has statistics underneath it, and it's full of passion. And that book is called basically Them Before Us. So take a look at what they have. That Them Before Us website is a place that will educate you, and it'll do exactly what Josh just asked you to do. It's a great, great place to be informed, and they've got scholars working for them that do real research, rich research. And as best as they can, because every human has a bias, that just tries to eliminate any bias from it. So I am very pro Them Before Us website. So I'm going to have a link right here in the show notes. There'll be a link to this book. And, I just want to say, Josh, God bless you for the work you are doing. May your family be blessed by your fatherly, protection over them, your covering. And, may you start turning this world around, that your children take this mantle after you've passed it to them and help their grandchildren and so on and so forth. God bless you. These are great efforts.
Thank you so much.
I want you to follow my show. You will see when I have great guests like Josh Wood on it, these messages. God has given so many people amazing messages, passions, things that they have to do. And he's given me a voice to help put them out there. So go to my website, breakfastwithbacon.com. Follow me on YouTube here, Rumble, X, Instagram, Facebook, and see, you might find a topic there that strikes you as that's where God needs me to be. You aren't going to always have information sent to you anymore, because censorship is real. The same people that are trying to put adults before children are the same people that are trying to stop us from doing good. So they want to hinder the true messages. So go ahead and sign up for my newsletter. If Josh has a newsletter, Them Before Us, others, sign up for their newsletters, because that is the only way you're going to be sure to get the information once the censorship is in full mode. So I think I've said enough. Josh, I think you remember too how I end the show. You got this part?
I'm ready.
Okay. I am Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life
Sunny side up.
Got it.